Welcome everybody to this session on creative arts therapy and congenital deafblindness. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the various lands across Australia, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. Aboriginal people have a strong connection to art, and art is strong in their culture, which by way of capturing their stories and sharing information about land, events and beliefs. So, which segues beautifully into introducing Claire Fraser, who is a creative arts therapist and will be speaking to us today about her experience and skills in working with people with congenital deafblindness. I would just ask that if you have any questions for Claire as the presentation is going along, if you could please use the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. So we would prefer you to use the Q&A rather than the chat. And it's my great pleasure to now hand over to you, Claire. Thank you so much for giving up your hour to share your knowledge with us today.
No worries. Thanks, Meredith. It's great to have so many people here to hear about something that I'm really passionate about. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge that this is a presentation about people born deaf and blind, and some people born deaf and blind are able to speak about their experiences with art therapy, but no one that I work with is able to come here and speak about their own experiences today. So just always keeping in mind the Deafblind International motto, nothing about us without us, and just really holding the people that we're talking about today in the centre of everything that we speak about today. I would also like to acknowledge other art therapists that have worked in this space before me. So Tess, Emily, and I work with another art therapist, Victoria, as well. So just, yeah, wanted to acknowledge that there's other people working in this space and that also have contributed to the learnings which I'm sharing with you today. So I'm a creative arts therapist speaking about creative arts therapy with people born deafblind today. I'll be speaking about a range of different ideas, which a lot come from art therapy, but I'd really encourage you to think of this as a presentation that is about how to be creative and try some new things with this population. So yeah, just yeah, taking it as how to be creative with people born deaf and blind. So just go to my first slide. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. I'll tell you a little bit about me and my background, a little bit about creative arts therapy in Australia, a bit about characteristics of people born deaf and blind, relationship and connection, art materials, elements to the creative process, and what creativity offers. And there'll be time, hopefully, if I don't talk too much, time for some questions at the end. So on the right, there's a picture of a baby Claire. I'm, I think, 17 there. And I was working with some students, deaf students in Malaysia, putting on a, I think it was a drama production. So I've got a background in Auslan and deaf studies. I studied Auslan a long time ago. And then I went on to study disability and I went into education, so working with students with complex disability. And I really was passionate and interested in people's emotional and social well-being, as well as self-expression. And I kept thinking about what is a way to work with people that don't have a lot of speech or have real challenges with communication. How can we provide experiences that are that benefit people's well-being and improve mental health? And I thought art therapy was a really good match for that. I have a background in dabbling in lots of different types of art making. So I do a bit of weaving, a bit of clay, and a lot of painting myself. So yeah, I went on to study my master's in art therapy. I'm very lucky to currently work at Able Australia, which is an organisation in Melbourne with deafblind adults. And I work as an art therapist, and I also work as a deafblind consultant, where I use a lot of the knowledge that I gain from working with clients with creative arts. I use that to then support the clients' support networks and their other support workers and support teams about how to better support that person. So that's a bit about me. So let's talk a little bit about creative arts therapy. So this is a little bit more general. It's an allied health profession that sits alongside occupational therapy, speech therapy, music therapy, and it has a professional body as well. So you have to be professionally registered and hold a master's qualification. Our professional body is ANZACATA, so ANZACATA. And there's a website at the end. I've got some resources that website will be in. And creative arts therapy can include a really broad range of different ways of practicing. So some people use dance, some people use movement, some people use story. So there's a broad range of creative modalities that a creative arts therapist might use. So it's, like I said, it's a 2-year master's qualification with quite in-depth mental health training and a deep knowledge of how to use art materials and form therapeutic relationships with people. It is a psychotherapeutic profession, which means that it focuses on emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being of a person. It's an active and experiential therapy, which means that it requires the client to be active and involved in the process. Reasons for referral. There's lots of different reasons why someone might be referred to art therapy. Art therapy is used across many, many different sectors. And some of the reasons why I've received referrals for people born deaf and blind for art therapy might be support with a really big loss in their life, wanting to support with emotional regulation, building social relationships, expanding interests. So those are all reasons why someone might be referred to art therapy. So when we're thinking about people born deaf and blind, and I'm thinking about the clients that I work with, there's a whole range of things that I consider when I'm thinking about their life and the context of them as a human. And these all seem, the first few seem quite negative, but I think it's really important to just be aware and really understand the person in the context of their whole life. So the first thing I think about is the level of isolation the person is experiencing. So not just because they're deaf and blind, but they may not have adequate one-to-one support in their life. They may be at a day centre and be the only deaf-blind person there, so there might not be the correct supports in place to support them. Yeah, so just really, I guess, noticing that's a really, I guess, common trait in this population. Anxiety as well. So often people born deaf-blind may have a high level of anxiety. The world can be a pretty scary place when you can't see and hear and understand what's going on around you and who's communicating with you. So anxiety and trauma. And when I say trauma, I don't necessarily mean one traumatic event, but often I'm working with people who are older, who've lived through many, many changes in the disability sector, and thinking about the types of support they've received over time, and I guess experiencing a high level of isolation over the period of their life can really compound. And so that's how I sort of think of trauma as a more broad experience for that person. Also thinking about often high levels of understimulation and lack of occupation in day-to-day life as well. So that's another big factor as well that I think about, is often there's a real lack of new experiences or novelty, or trying different things. They might have been offered the same activity every single day for the last 10 years. So just sort of a perpetual state of almost boredom. Yeah, so that's sort of the more I guess heavier lens on this. But the last two dot points, the dual sensory loss masking cognitive ability, that the concept that that really masks what potentially is going on underneath for that person. And I get really excited whenever I get a referral for working with someone born deaf and blind, because I think, what are we going to unlock in the art room? And when we introduce some creative processes, what am I going to learn about you and what's going to be uncovered? And the image on the right, which is, it's a black and red image with a figure of it's made from blue tack, a blue tack sort of human figure in the shape of a star jump, is a client that created this. And it was a really beautiful experience that I think really highlights that dot point about the dual sensory loss masking cognitive ability. This is a client that's considered to not initiate communication very much. There's limited symbolic language. He's sort of perceived to not really understand what's going on around him. And we began playing with a wooden figurine that people often, of a human, that people often, I think, use for fashion drawing or something like that. And we started playing around with it, and he started matching his arms to match the shape of the human figure. And then he started playing with my body as well, so moving my arms and moving the figure's arms. And it was sort of this game that built up over a few weeks. And then I offered some different modeling material, and he started to form the body on the canvas, and then he painted it. He's done some finger paint over it. So it's almost a self-portrait. But yeah, just that experience of someone that on the surface people perceive to not really think there's much understanding going on, to be able to link his body to a figure, to my body, to his body, and use different shapes. It was, yeah, a real joy to have that experience with him. And the last dot point, as I alluded to before, I just get really excited about the possibility that creative arts have for people born deaf and blind, like what's going to happen, and I get really excited. So let's get into it a bit more. But first, there's an image on the right of some stacks of wood. They're bits of balsa wood, and they're kind of all randomly nailed together. And this slide is just an invitation for people to really unpack their own ideas about art and creativity and what you think good art is. We often go into galleries and look on the walls and think of art as like these amazing portraits and classic Italian painters, and just unpacking your own reaction to art and creativity. You know, something that people often say is, I'm no good at art, I can't do art, and I'm not creative. So I invite you to reflect on that, because those ideas that you have, it can be very easy to bring them into the art room, or when you're trying to be creative with someone, you can sometimes almost project those ideas onto the client, and it can actually really ruin the experience for them. And when we're talking about art making today, I'm really talking about art making as a process, so not necessarily a finished product that you hang on your wall. That's not what I'm talking about today. It's about the process and meaningful creativity for people. And the reason why I have this picture up is because it's a good little moment of vulnerability to share with you, just to demonstrate the point I just mentioned. I was working with a client and they were getting really into the woodworking, using the hammer and nails, and I was thinking a million ideas, like, oh, we could perhaps look into a community woodworking class and get him a toolkit for home and he could do repairs. You know, I was getting really excited. And I bought a toolkit, and there was lots of different things in this toolkit where you could make like a wooden car and a pencil holder. And we started to explore this kit together, and I'd started to, without checking, put my idea of what the function of this activity should be. So and he wasn't interested, it became too structured. There became a real goal. He lost interest, and it wasn't about the part that was meaningful for him, which was digging around, finding the blocks that he wanted, choosing what he wanted, hammering it in, and then exploring it as it changed. Each time he hammered a piece, it changed, and he got to explore and turn it upside down in his hand. And that was really meaningful for him. And I realized about 5 minutes in, I was like, Claire, come on, like, check yourself. So yeah, just this photo is just a reminder to unpack your own ideas and just always check when you're introducing someone to something, why you're doing it and how you're doing it and how they're going to experience it as well. So some key points here, just to think about when you're starting to engage in creative processes with people born deaf and blind. So creative arts are essentially a sensory experience. So sight, hearing, touch, smell. And when you're working with someone, thinking about their residual senses that could be present. So you might work with someone with a small amount of vision. So using things that are really high contrast. So if you're doing weaving, using high contrast threads, using white paint on black paper, or having a light box as well. So tapping into the senses that are remaining. And sound as well is something that people often don't think about too much in the art making experience, but the sound of hammering, for example, or ripping paper, or even washing brushes as well. So really thinking about art making as that multisensory experience for the person. And the next dot point, taste as well. So often, sometimes people born deaf and blind will explore through their mouth. And if you look up Taste Safe, there'll be a whole range of different recipes and ways to make art supplies that are non-toxic and the person can explore safely using their mouth. There's heaps of different paint recipes that you can make easily at home. So I suggest you look that up. But really for this population, touch is the key, and understanding that that people think, learn, express and experience through touch. And the touch is really crucial in not only the creative experience, but building a relationship with the person as well. And I'll talk more about that in the future slides. And the last one is set up an orientation. I meant to get a picture for this, but I forgot to. But just some simple little things that you can do to really set the person up for success in the space. So I often use things such as, it sounds a little bit strange, but like a kitty litter tray can be really great for containing the art making or creative process. People can hold it. It's clear where things are happening, and clarity for people around like paint holders. So using paint holders, which are like cups that you can really grab, as opposed to like a flat palette of paint. and using different textured tubs for different things. So for example, with the brushes, I always use a particular textured tub, and that way the client will know that feels the outside of the tub, that's where all the brushes are. So just making everything really clear and using hand under hand. So that's a technique spoken about in other presentations, but your hand under the client's hand and just guiding them to where everything is. So ensuring that they're familiar with everything in the space. So the key aspect before anything else, before you introduce any art materials or anything, is relationship and building a connection with the person. So building up the familiarity with the client. So it's very dependent on each client. So you might use your sign name. You might have I have a bracelet with a particular smell. And I always start with a little familiar game or routine where it's me and the person, and it's completely unique to that person. So one person, we sit with our hands touching and we play little finger games. And over time that has progressed. And now we actually start the session with a bit of a dance, which has grown over time, and slowly she's initiated, but that's how she knows I'm with Claire, we're in the art room, she's following my lead, and we're going to do this to start the session. And then we go into the art making. So building up familiarity and a sense of routine. And it will be different for every client as well. So making it secure, there's a sense of predictability as well. But it's enjoyable, something enjoyable that's unique to that client. Proximity and touch is key, obviously, as well. So sitting near the person, ensuring that there's an element of touch there. And that way also you can have shared experiences. So someone might be painting and I might be next to them and I might be painting as well, and they can reach over and feel my painting and me painting with them. So having a parallel art making experience. Attunement. So you and I, and that's really speaking to how we relate to each other. And when we think about therapy, spoken therapy, so verbal therapy, people go to therapists to feel seen and heard and understood. And with someone born deaf and blind, how do people feel seen and heard? It's through touch. So everything that my clients do, so they might itch their head and become quite agitated. I notice that, and I notice that by itching where they've itched, and thinking about what that says to them. Like, I'm noticing that you're a bit agitated. And again, using that touch to witness the artwork. So when you're art making, when the client is art making, how do they know that they're seeing your work and you're interested in their experience? It's not through me looking at it, because they don't know I'm looking at it. So it's a little bit complicated, but need to think, how do they know that I know? You know, so I'm using touch. So I would touch their work and they would feel that I'm touching their work. So they feel attended to and witnessed. So there's lots of frameworks and resources around building relationship and connection with people with complex disability and people born deaf and blind. So I draw upon intensive interaction, which is a technique and that you guys might look into. And I use video interaction guidance, which is what I use in my consultancy work. So using video as a way of reflecting on practice. But VIG is, for short, has the principles of attunement, which really build the foundations of building relationship and connection with people. So I'd suggest those as resources as well. So now that we've spoken about relationship, I'll move to the art materials. So I mentioned taste safe before. I would also just make a safety note on things that are non-toxic and washable. So thinking about smell, so smells of things like permanent markers, glues and things like that. Just being aware that people might be really, really interested in them and smell them a lot, and then that may have impacts on them. And washable things as well. I've had a few real disasters over time with using substances that I thought were washable that weren't, or thinking it'll be fine, I'm sure it'll just come off. Never think that. Yeah, so just checking that things are washable, and if you're not sure, putting a bit on a tea towel and running it through the wash and just checking is my hot tip. So with art materials, in art therapy, we have a really big spectrum called the resistive to fluid spectrum. So that is a spectrum or framework where art materials will fit somewhere on that scale. So you've got your really resistive materials such as wood, nails, lead pencils, charcoal, really hard charcoals, so materials that are really not malleable at all. And then in the middle, you've got things like oil pastels, chalk pastels, tissue paper, feathers, so a little bit more resistance, a little bit less resistance and a little bit more, flexible. And then you've got right to your really, really fluid. So on the right there, I've got a client that is got one hand on the board and they're playing with really, really wet paint. And they've got a sponge brush in their right hand as well. So you've got, really, really wet paint. And it's important to note as well that materials can shift on that spectrum as well. So if you think of clay, really, really wet clay can almost become completely fluid. However, you can leave it there for a day and come back the next day and it becomes more malleable, and then it can if you fire it, become super resistive and you could chisel away at it. So everyone will have really different preferences for where they like to explore on that spectrum. And it's there's a lot more in-depth knowledge about this, but different mediums might evoke different feelings in people. So for example, your really fluid mediums can often evoke emotional feelings and sort of, I guess, a loss of control, which for some people might feel really freeing. Like I know myself, I love wet paint everywhere, no boundaries, paint all over the table. For me, that's a really great experience. However, for other people, that would be completely terrifying. It would be their worst nightmare. Where are the edges? What's happening? It would just be completely overwhelming. Whereas resistive materials evoke feelings of control and structure. So whereas for me, I would find for example, a small piece of paper and a lead pencil, I would find that too restrictive. I'd be really bored. And it wouldn't be interesting enough for me. So the people that we work with, it will be the same. So really thinking about how they're experiencing it and what feels good for them and supports them to feel in control and safe with whatever medium that you're working with them. The next dot point is about structure and complexity of tasks. So you've got your range of different mediums, but the next dot point, just thinking about the structure of the task and how complicated you're making it and the complexity of the task. So if we take something like weaving can be a really complex task. Lots of instructions, you have to thread up the loom, there's different ways of doing it. It can be like a 50-step process, but you can also make it really, really simple. So you can have literally like an old picture frame, you can put a few strings on it, And then you can jam bits and pieces into it and do some really abstract weaving, still weaving, just less complex and structured. So thinking about the people that you're working with and how complex and structured does it need to be for them to understand what's happening, but not overwhelm at the same time. Because if you make it too structured, you're going to the interest is going to be completely lost. But if it's too free flowing, it may also feel like there's no boundaries. I don't know what's happening. I don't understand. So it's going to be really different for each person. So some other elements, I'll just wait for the interpreter swap. So some other elements in the art making process that I think about are kinesthetic and sensory. And there's two pictures here. On the left, I've got a client engaging in some marble painting with a tray, shaking it back and forth. And on the right, I have a client with a board with a big lump of wet clay and a spray bottle. And she's gradually making it wetter and wetter by adding more water. So these elements relate to how people express themselves and process information and engage in creative processes. And in my working with people born deaf and blind, I found that these two elements are really important: movement and kinesthetic area and the sensory area. So kinesthetic really speaks to movement, rhythm, action, and the release of energy. So thinking about things like you're hammering, ripping cardboard, kneading soft clay, banging brushes on a table. And that can really be a release of emotion for people, a release of excitement or a release of anger. It can also discharge energy in a really slow, rhythmic manner. So if you think of like slow pounding of a brush or kneading clay, can be quite calming for people. There's also the sensory element, which is really about the sensations of different materials. So the surface quality, so you can see on the right there, it's super wet. And this particular client just kept getting it wetter and wetter and wetter and just loved that sensation. Whereas the client on the left there with the marble painting, he was more drawn to the kinesthetic element. So loved shaking the tray back and forth. And for him, the sensory element was a little bit scary, and he'd gently feel the marbles on the top of his hand and get his hands a little bit wet, and that was just enough for him. Whereas, yeah, the client on the right, as you can see, there's just the wetness of the clay, which she was just really engaged in that sensory element of the clay. And different mediums and processes will switch back and forth or involve both. So as I mentioned, the marble tray, it involves lots and lots of movement, but there was also that sensory element on his hand of the marbles. And similarly with the clay, you can include tools, so like stabbing or cutting, and even the spray bottle, like standing back and spraying, so involving some movement as well. And that might be needed at different times. I'll speak a little bit about the window of tolerance, but for example, the client on the right became too overwhelmed with the amount of wetness with the clay and became, I guess, emotional or upset. It was too overwhelming. But by introducing movement when the sensory experience becomes too overwhelming, so some distance, so introducing a tool, or maybe removing some of the water so it stops getting that overwhelming sensory element, is a way too of bringing it back to something that's more tolerable for the person. So there's lots of different processes, art making processes, such as felting, slime, that involve both movement and the sensory aspect as well. So I mentioned, this is a slide about safety and tolerance, and I've got a client's artwork on the right, some felting. It's pink and blue and purple, and yeah, thinking about yeah, what people feels okay for some people and where their threshold is. So window of tolerance is something, I think it's a psychologist, Dan Siegel. So it's something important to think about in terms of relationship, but also materials. Everyone will have a threshold for what feels safe and okay. And when things don't feel safe and okay, they may become hyper aroused or hypo aroused. So everything becomes too much and it's really overwhelming, and can become overwhelmed and upset, or might completely freeze and just be still. So it's a lot more complex than that. So I'd suggest looking it up if you're interested. But that window of tolerance is something that I think about all the time with art materials. So as I mentioned before, the client with the clay, everything became really overwhelming and too much. So knowing how to bring it back within what feels okay for that particular person. So that's something to think about with art materials, but also relationship as well. Everyone has different tolerance levels with relationship. So in the art room, some clients like to constantly interact with you and have you there all the time, and there's a lot of back and forth. Other clients like to have a little bit, and then that's just enough. And maybe over time, that tolerance level will slowly increase. So they might be able to tolerate interacting with you for a little bit more. Or the example I gave before with the marble tray, with the client shaking the tray and then feeling a little bit of the wet paint, over time, he might be able to slowly tolerate that a little bit more and be a little bit more curious about these marbles and this paint and what the paint can do. So that's something to think about. And as I mentioned right at the start, clients can often have quite a lot of anxiety or hold a lot of trauma. So small changes that you make with art materials and relationship can have a really big impact on their experience. So thinking about how you present materials and how you interact with someone, even if you make the smallest little change, it can have a huge impact into that person's experience. So for example, the picture I had earlier of the client with the blue tack, the human figure, that was a little canvas that he could hold and a little pack of blue tack. Whereas if I had offered him a really big canvas and a piece of modeling clay that he couldn't control, he probably wouldn't have been that interested. He wouldn't have really felt like he was in control. He might not have enjoyed having that particular blue tack, that you've got a lot of control over blue tack. So just thinking about how you present things. If someone's not interested in something, consider changing it just a little bit. So making something a bit smaller or a bit bigger or a different material can actually have a huge impact, and the experience can completely change. And similarly with relationship, just slightly changing the way you interact with someone a little bit can have a huge impact, and they may open up more and be more interactive. Yeah. And I've got the last point in bold, holding attentive time and space. And I'd say that is the biggest thing. I think leaving lots of time and space for people to really lead the process of building relationship and the process of creativity. It can be slow, and being mindful of your ideas and expectations of what you think is going to make a good creative, what a good art session, creative session is going to be with someone. Yeah, really checking that. yeah, holding space for the client to really lead the process to something that's going to be meaningful for them. So creativity, what the space offers. I've got a picture on the left of my client with the woodworking who just discovered sanding, using sandpaper on the wood, and discovered that he could change the shape of the pieces of wood, and had also had this experience that he thought was hilarious, sanding the wood and having the sawdust fly up in his nose and sneezing, which was really funny. He thought was hilarious. And he kept showing me the pieces of wood that he was changing. So new experiences is the first dot point. There's so many options in the creative world to have new experiences. Really, art materials are endless. I'm always discovering new ways to use them. My clients are always showing me new ways to use them as well. That's actually probably where I learn the most. I often have experiences where I think, I didn't think of using that this way. So they lead the way in how they want to be creative with the materials. It's an opportunity for fun, joy, and play, which is something that, from my experience, is often really missing for the clients that I work with, is a sense of enjoyment and play and pleasure and fun, and that's really something really unique about creativity, is when someone feels safe in the relationship and different experiences are introduced, you can have a lot of fun and get new ideas for play and interactions together. It offers the unexpected, which is also something very rare for a lot of clients born deaf and blind. You know, things can drop on the floor. You can get sawdust thrown up in your face. You can think you're about to interact with something and it actually behaves completely differently. I had a client the other day who was shocked that these mosaic tiles, we smashed up mosaic tiles, she was feeling them and they were all different shapes, and the way she was interacting with them was very similar to, you know, magnet boards or puzzles where everything is the same shape. And she was having this experience looking through this big box of mosaic materials, finding out that things could be different shapes, which sounds like we know that, but for her, this was the first time that all these random shaped things were in the box. It was always usually very structured and everything was the same, and you match them up and that's how it goes. So having unexpected experiences, and yeah, just the endless opportunity that different art materials can offer. I spoke to it just before. There's so many different processes, and yeah, endless worlds to explore in the art room. So just a few takeaway points. Creativity is for everyone. So it's possible for everyone to engage in creativity. So never sort of think, oh, there's not, you know, it's not possible for this person, even if it's just something really small. Yeah, it's possible for everyone. Always center the person at the very center of the process of building relationships and creativity. So it's come up a few times, but not putting your ideas and letting them lead the process of the relationship and the creativity. Creativity is endless. There's a whole world out there, and I've got a few different search terms and links at the end here. And yeah, just give it a go as well. Don't think I'm not an art therapist, I can't be creative with someone, or I've never done art before, so therefore I can't introduce some art materials with someone. That's not the case at all. I just suggest giving it a try. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm really happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was excellent. And I did forget to mention that you're a deafblind consultant as well as a creative arts therapist. So yeah, lots of food for thought there. And we will open it up for questions.